The Routings from 850 recording, made in 1974 at Steve's house in Manhattan, marked a turning point in Ben and my understanding of the New York City telephone network. Up until that time, we thought we understood it pretty well. But after analyzing the recordings from Steve's house, it became clear that, well, let's just say that our attitude about the New York network changed and pretty much amounted to this.
First of all, it's a fantastic. It's a machine. It's made up. It's composed of There's all kinds of little. There's all kinds of little. And every one is guaranteed to break down.
Okay, that last part, no, but the complexity. It became overwhelming. But Ben got a handle on it and pretty much understood the entire thing, and to this day remembers it really well. Now, from my house in Long Island, it was pretty easy to see that New York City had been divided into sectors, with a different crossbar tandem in charge of each one. This is the most consistent routing pattern for New York City. There are certain places, such as Long Island in the early 1970s, that use this pattern exclusively. But then there are other overlays on top of it, and that's what kind of makes it complicated, because this pattern, which I'll refer to as the sector tandems, is just one layer of the routing pattern for New York City. It's the most consistent pattern, and it's a good one to start with, and it happens to be the one I learned first. Bill, who was also in Long Island, but out in Farmingdale instead of Lynbrook, had the same pattern, and so we were talking it over during the years, and we got to figure it out. And actually, the sector tandems were not all the same, even though they were all crossbar tandems. Most of them were two crossbar tandems side by side, but they set it up so that it was like one tandem, and for the most part, you couldn't tell which one you were hitting. There were just some that had a subtle difference or had two different recording IDs on the intercept recordings. So to us, it was really like one big tandem, and they really weren't all the same. For example, the older ones tended to not use the MF signaling system, while the newer ones would tend to use MF as much as possible. Then there were those that were kind of in the middle of the period of installation. For example, Midtown Tandem was installed in 1962, Tremont Tandem in 1963, and let me actually use Tremont as an example, because Tremont, being in the middle, you can tell by the way it pulses to its end offices. Now, originally, Tremont was something that Bill and I had direct trunks to from our Long Island homes. Tremont was the sector tandem for the Bronx and for the little part of Manhattan, that little tip of Manhattan that sticks up with the Harlem River to the east of it. That whole area is the Tremont sector. How did we know that this was Tremont tandem? Well, we got to know the sound of the trunks. You got to know a certain trunk group would have a particular sound, and enough calls failed so that you would get a recording every now and then, and of course the recordings had ID numbers. Of course, being phone freaks and dealing with N-carrier trunks, there were ways to cause the tandems to give us the recording, in this case resetting the trunk, ringing my 2600 bell, and just waiting.
I'm sorry. Your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording. 21226. I'm sorry. Your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording. 21226.
So we would learn that 21226,
21226.
21226 is that tandem in the Bronx. 5168, 5169 is that tandem pair in Suffolk County, and so on. And then later, either through the recordings list that we got a hold of or asking switchmen, we'd get the name. And in the period early 1972 to fall 1973, We lost our trunks to Tremont, although it continued to be a part of the network. And so I don't have a lot of recordings of Tremont made from our home phones. But through the entire 1970s, there was a picture-perfect place to get recordings of calls going through Tremont Tandem, and that was City Island. City Island is a tiny little island, part of the Bronx, has a lot of seafood restaurants and fishing piers, and from City Island, which had its own little crossbar 5, pretty much every call that was local went through Tremont Tandem over either N1 carrier or N3 type carrier. And so it's a great place to do a study of Tremont Tandem because it uses Tremont for the entirety of New York City, Nassau County, and southern Westchester. Great place to record Tremont Tandem, and we did. And being installed in 1963, Tremont is kind of in the middle of all these sector tandems in the way it behaves. I'll give you some concrete examples. This group of calls are all recorded from City Island from a dial tone first payphone. It's a crossbar 5 office. It uses a coin junctor and goes out on N1 carrier to Tremont Tandem, which then continues on a direct trunk to an end office, in each case in Zone 1 of Manhattan, the lower part. Now, if you're calling a panel, you have to use revertive pulsing to communicate with it, and on this example to Plaza 3 in East 56th Street, it's rather obvious that this is a revertive pulse call.
The number you have reached is not in service. In area code 212, please check the number and dial again. The number you have reached is not in service. In area code 212.
The trunk from East 56 up to AIS, which at this point is in Upper Manhattan, is a Hummy wire trunk.
Operator 222, what number are you calling, please?
753-0100.
753-0100, thank you. Sorry, the number has been disconnected, sir, and there's no new numbers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
So you could hear the N1 carrier singing along with the voice of AIS and the operator. That's the trunk from City Island to Tremont. The hum and that crossbar 1 revertive pulsing in the background is the wire trunk from Plaza 3 up to the North Manhattan office that has AIS in it. And Tremont did have to RP because we're calling a panel. Now, N1 carrier is the oldest carrier system, not the oldest trunk type, but the oldest carrier system that New York Tel was using in New York City. And along with it, very often you would find supervision relays that made some interesting old noises. Here's a call to the supervision test in Plaza 3, again over N1 carrier, from City Island Crossbar 5 to Tremont Tandem, and then from Tremont down to Plaza 3, it's either a wire trunk or a T-carrier trunk. I can't tell from this recording. Now, when you're calling a crossbar 1, you don't have to RP. But most of the sector tandems did most of the time just because there was so much RP equipment in the network. So you could use the most modern signaling system, MF, but tandems that were installed in 1963, like Tremont, would almost always RP to number 1 crossbar. Here's an example of that. crossbar ones could and did receive MF at this time, but medium-age tandems like Tremont tended to RP to crossbar ones. Almost always. There were few exceptions with Tremont. Crossbar 5s, on the other hand, which had been installed a lot later, no earlier really than 1948, tended to be MF'd to by Tremont.
The number you have reached, 594-6666, has been changed. The new number is 682-5744. Please make a note of it. 594-6666 has been changed. The new number is 682-5744. If you need assistance, you may stay on the line and an operator will answer.
Operator radio, you calling 594-6666.
That's right.
The number's changed to 682-5744.
682-5744?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
The Weathercron AIS didn't show up in New York until a pretty late date in the 70s, and so hearing this on N1 carrier is a little bit anachronistic. Here's something you could have heard in the early 70s. You may have noticed we got an N3 type trunk that time, and that was the wonderful LW4 ring in West 36th Street with some sort of equipment on the line making it sort of gurgly. Whether that was customer-provided equipment, gonna rip out the service for that, or whether it was a phone company device, I don't know. LW4 is not a technical term, but one of the nonsense exchange names that New York Telephone began assigning, I think, around 1968 or 69. But don't quote me on that. So we find Tremont Tandem. Get this damn thing the hell away from my microphone. Where was I? So we find Tremont Tandem MFing to crossbar 5s for the most part, and it was established in 1963. But Richmond Hill Tandem, established in 1954, RPs to crossbar 5s. Here's an example from Farmingdale. All of the examples I've featured so far involve trunks where the crossbar tandem does let you hear the outpulsing, and you may notice that the revertive pulsing is very loud on some examples and soft on others. This variation in levels has a lot to do with the terminating trunk, that is, from the crossbar tandem to the actual end office we're calling. That's where the variation in levels is introduced. And this next example shows it very clearly because here Richmond Hill tries to put a call through to a crossbar 5. The first call fails, so it has to drop that trunk and pick another one. And the second trunk just happens to be one where the RP ends up sounding a lot softer, and that's just the conditions of one trunk versus the other.
The number you are calling is not equipped to receive incoming calls. Please obtain the main number of the company from the directory or information and try your call again. This is a recording. The number you are calling is not equipped to receive incoming calls. Please obtain the main number of the company from the directory or information and try your call again. This is a recording. The number
That recording was for Centrex's in the Kennedy Airport Crossbar 5 office, famous for its tone plant that always ran too slow. Not only did Richmond Hill RP to crossbar 5s, it even RP'd to ESS's. Here's one in Forest Hills. Of course, they all pretty much sounded alike anyway. So we find Richmond Hill RPing, even to an ESS, and it was established in 1954. Queen's Tandem, on the other hand, established 1965, and then a second unit added in 1970, MFs to an ESS. These Richmond Hill and Queens examples are all from Farmingdale, which kept Richmond Hill and Queens even after the routing pattern was changed and had them as late as 1980. Of course, Queens preferred to MF to crossbar 5s as well, and also to crossbar 1s. It was that modern, and its MF speed was pretty fast. Now here's a relatively rare case of Queen's Tandem actually RPing to a crossbar 1. If this were Richmond Hill, it would be normal. But the RP was so surprising that I actually did something on this call to make sure the call had not been misrouted. You know, I'm going to make sure that Farmingdale didn't route this to Richmond Hill by accident. How am I going to do that? Well, this is N1 carrier. In case you're wondering what I did, check the Hi-Fi 914 tape. That explains it. And this will harmlessly, by the way, allow us to just let the trunk time out to the recording. It's waiting for digits which we aren't sending. Okay, I guess it drops a card.
Call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording.
21235.
We're sorry, but because of a temporary equipment condition, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording.
21235.
We're sorry.
Yes, it is Queens. Now here's the N1 carrier noise recorded with very low tape noise. Did you hear that? The background howl went away for a second, and that was associated with the handshake of a nearby trunk. Oh, shut up. Thank you. As I was saying, the background howl that we hear here momentarily paused, and that was a nearby trunk giving a supervision handshake, and if you listened carefully, you could hear the MFs after that. If that call were to answer, this background howl on our trunk would go away. It is literally the 3700 hertz supervision tone of that other trunk bleeding into this one, and that shows up as a howl somewhere between 500 to 700 hertz. So what you've been listening to is the sound of calling into New York City from places like southern Westchester County and from Long Island, and N1 and N3 carrier were predominant during the 1960s. But some places, such as Lynbrook, are close enough to the Brooklyn and Queens sector tandems that they don't use N carrier, they just use regular old cable pair trunks. And those calls sound different. Here's a call to a crossbar 1 going through Queens tandem, dialed from the Lynbrook 9 Valley Stream 5 crossbar 1. You know, it's good to be calling from crossbar 1 again. And Lynbrook 9 sounds very much like Ben's office, Neptune 4, except that it has new dial tone. But the type of register senders are very similar. Notice the gonginess on this next example. from Lynbrook 9 through Queens Tandem to the Whitestone ESS. Ah, those pure tones. They invented that tone set in the mid-1960s, and it sounded so great over the wire trunks and then the analog carrier trunks. And then they up and invented T-carrier, and all of a sudden that beautiful sine wave tone just sounded like crap. More on that in a few minutes. But anyway, this being a wire trunk, you cannot juice it off, at least most of them you can't. You cannot whistle it off. And so, how am I going to find out what tandem is handling this part of Queens? Well, there is a way to do it, because there is a special exchange code, actually two of them, 830 and 990. This exchange is used for New York Telephone's Centrex CU service, and what that usually is a step PBX that is dialable from the outside directly. And what they would typically do is they would take certain central office codes and assign them to crossbar tandems instead of to end offices. The crossbar tandem would look at what number group you were dialing in the code. For example, if you were dialing 990, the office code, the crossbar tandem that handles that code looks at the next two digits, actually the next three, but usually it was done by the 100 group, and figures out which PBX that should go to. And in that way, these little step PBXs were given dialable numbers from the rest of the network. Here's 990 going through from Lynbrook 9.
You have dialed a non-working number at the Department of Social Service. Please consult your directory or call the operator on 990-5793 for assistance. Thank you. You have dialed a non-working number at the Department.
Geez, you can hear the step switch room noise in the background. Now this 99055 PBX was used as a conference several times during the 1970s, and you can hear some of the activity on the line now. It is still conference compatible, even though the recording's on.
You have dialed a non-working number at the Department of Social Service. Please.
See, there was the sound of someone ringing in. It just sounds like a conference. And of course it was every time the recording broke down.
3 for assistance. Thank you.
He hung up.
You have dialed a non-working number at the Department of Social Service. Please consult your directory or call the operator on 990-5793 for assistance. Thank you.
Again, he rang in and hung up. There you heard someone calling in, hearing silence, and hanging up. What's happened this time is the recording has tried to start up and gotten stuck. So here it is being a perfectly good conference again. If we were to just stay on the line and not give it a chance to completely reset, we could start a conference right now. But there's more Lynbrook 9 to record. But first, here's how to find out what tandem is handling 990. All I have to do is walk downstairs to my parents' phone line, pick it up, and dial 516, my own area code, plus 212, the area code for New York City, plus 990, the office code we are trying to check out to see what tandem handles it, plus one more digit. And what that does is this.
Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording. 21235. I'm sorry, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording. 21235.
Now, what this method effectively does is it puts the call through to whatever sector tandem is appropriate, and then that tandem usually will give us the recording that says your call did not go through. I will explain why later, but it's a handy little method because you can actually check out any particular office to see what sector tandem handles it. For example, 634, Ben's office code, is in eastern Queens, and you might think that being pretty far east, Queens tandem handles 634. Well, let's find out. I'll dial 516-212-6341.
I'm sorry, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again?
21238.
I'm sorry, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again?
21238.
Ah, so Ben's office is actually in the Richmond Hill sector. It turned out, by the way, that the Queens Tandem sector was very small. It was really just Whitestone, Flushing, Bayside, North Jamaica, and Hollis. Just that little northeastern corner of Queens. And that was surprising because Queens Tandem had a lot of important functions in the network, but as far as calling into New York City, just that tiny little northeastern part of Queens. The vast majority of Queens offices were in the Richmond Hill sector. But then there were 3 offices in western Queens: Astoria, Long Island City, and Newtown, which is located in Elmhurst. They were in a different sector. Also, there were parts of Brooklyn in that same sector. From Lynbrook 9, we had nice wire trunks to this other tandem. Sounded a little bit like the Queens Tandem trunks, but not quite as tinny. It just kind of had a deeper, bassier sound to it. Now that was a wireline trunk. Sounds somewhat different from the Queens Tandem trunk, but it's a little hard to tell them apart, so let's see.
I'm sorry, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording. 21231.
Okay, that's 21231. You can barely understand it. That's Bushwick Tandem. And somebody please save me from these terrible copies they're making of that Owen Murphy voice. I guess Richmond Hill sounded pretty good, but the rest of these are just...
I'm sorry, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording.
Ah, much better. Much, much better. This is the master tape.
I'm sorry, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording.
21231. Hey, Hey, I can do it too. I guess they didn't know what they were saying, so they'd parse the digits. Maybe some of them just wanted to hide what the digits meant. It's a secret. If you say 21231, they'll figure out what it means. Just sort of parse it, 21231. That'll fool them. 21226. Anyway, speaking of crystal clear bell-like sounds, the last four digits, 9979, also called official 79, were used for the loop checker tone. That was a test line that the phone company apparently used to use more in the early 60s than they did in the 70s because they stopped bothering to make sure they worked. And there was a point in 1970 where I was dialing all around the New York metro area, those last four digits. And occasionally I would find things that were a little unorthodox. Well, in the Clinton Avenue ESS in Brooklyn, which is in the Bushwick sector, the 9979 in the 735 code goes to a high tone in the ESS office. High tone is used for leaving phones off the hook, but actually in a number one ESS it has no function whatsoever. And is that maybe verification? No, I don't think it's used at all. Ringback, used for the ringback test line. That's the only thing it's used for. Well, even though you're calling all the way from Long Island to Brooklyn, when you call into this high-tone number, which is free, by the way, you can hear these beautiful little ringing sounds associated with the interrupter using that tone as one of the two tones that make up the busy and the reorder tone in the office. So it's a steady sine wave tone, except it's not exactly a perfect sine wave because the oscillator that makes it is, it's not exactly perfect. But the interrupter noises that you hear underneath it are just the coolest sound. It's like little imaginary bells ringing, and it's really just because of the busy and the reorder are being taken out of that tone in order to, that plus 620 hertz. I guess I should say high tone in ESS is 480. And I used to call this number up and just listen to this really cool sounding tone with those overtones in it. This is 735 official 79 as dialed from Lynbrook 9. It goes through Bushwick Tandem to the Clinton ESS. This tape has a lot of noisy, rumbly stuff. Here's the same thing filtered. And on that note, which is a B, by the way, well, the call waiting tone is a perfect A, musically speaking at least. Let's end this segment, but there will be more, including the story of how this, due to routing changes in the network, became this. But from Bill's house it was even worse, because even before the routing changes, for him it became this. Yikes! Anyway, that's next.